Hello and welcome. My name is Stephen Goldberg of Optimus Performance, bringing you practical tips and ideas on leadership, team development, and employee performance in the workplace. And as you can see, I have a wonderful guest with me today, Corinne Murray. I'm going to read her bio. We're going to have a nice conversation about the workplace. So Corinne is a seasoned operator and thought leader with an extensive experience in workplace strategy and design, brand and culture development, and customer experience. Throughout her career, Corinne has held leadership positions at top companies like WeWork, American Express, RXR, Gensler, and CBRE. I know that's a real estate company.
Yep.
Not sure about the others. She is passionate about partnering with business leaders to design people-centered approaches that balance the needs of employees and customers with the goals of the organization, ultimately driving comprehensive effectiveness and success that can be built upon long into the future. Well, welcome, Corinne. Glad to have you with me today.
Yes.
I'm not hearing you.
My bio
Okay,
sounds like
there you are.
a mouthful once I hear it played back to me in Word. My goodness.
Well, I do know we were talking about this before we started recording from the series on that company. And it was quite
Yes.
interesting, but you worked there, so you experienced it. I'm sure
Yes.
it's much
I
more
sure did.
impactful being in it than watching a series about it. So you have quite a
Definitely.
experience in the real estate industry, but
I
now
do.
you're
Yes.
helping companies with their strategy. We talked before starting and agreed that a good subject would be the transformation that companies are going through as a result of moving towards a hybrid model because of COVID and the future of the workplace. There's a lot of discussion. I've been reading about the banks here in Canada. Their stocks are falling because of their investment in real estate companies, lending to real estate companies that have a lot of commercial office space, and they're not being leased out. So there's a worry there about the hit that the banks may be taking. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the current situation as you see it. You're in New York City or Brooklyn, which is Ray, it's part of New York, actually. What do you see the current situation, the current climate in terms of the workplace and bringing people back in from the perspective, I guess, of the employer, that people that you've been
Yeah.
speaking to, your clients?
Yeah. So it's all interesting how the macro and micro view of the real estate landscape and the workplace landscape feed together. And a lot of why there's or a good contribution to why there are so many challenges with commercial real estate investments, like you were saying, with the Canadian banks and even the banks here in the United States. Commercial office is just going through a rebirth, and we've yet to really figure out what its next iteration is. And for anyone who is familiar with real estate, it has historically been the stable investment. And now we're in a phase where it's not, because the use case for commercial space is now up for discussion. And that's where hybrid work comes in, and folks that, through the pandemic, they scattered outside of city centers and, moved into the mountains and the forest, wherever, just getting further away from urban settings because that's what they chose. That's what they wanted. So we're seeing foot traffic and demand for big headquarter spaces in large cities going through a bit of an identity crisis. A lot of companies right now are still invested in bringing people back as consistently as possible. And it's a very complicated relationship, both from like an urban planning perspective and from a workforce strategy perspective as well. where a lot of folks who are experiencing hybrid, I think the growing pains that many have been experiencing are based on the fact that the whole premise of hybrid is it's good to be with people, it's good to be with your teammates and people that you accomplish work with, all of which are very true and things that I support and help companies articulate and design ways to make it happen. Where the challenge really sits right now is most companies stopped the conversation about hybrid at the geography. So meaning companies have decided Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we want you in the office. And that's all that they've really mapped out. There's no sort of programming to say, focus on having in-person meetings these days. Ensure that you're actually getting to spend time and have conversations with people that you otherwise wouldn't get in touch with. So there's a lot of research from the 70s around strong tie and weak tie relationships. The weak tie relationships are the ones, the people you see in your coffee shop, the people in your workplace where, you bump into in the pantry. Those are the actual relationships that are most crucial for getting work done, because that's how people cross-pollinate across different departments. But if we're all stuck on virtual meetings from morning to evening, it completely negates the value that hybrid working provides. So that's the piece that a lot of companies haven't yet sorted out and is getting in the way of the maturation of hybrid and organizations having a better handle on how much space they need, where they want their space to be. So then they can that way work with landlords to identify what types of environments in what neighborhoods make the most sense for them. So from that macro standpoint of landlords and developers, they have their hands tied behind their back because they can't make moves until there's a level of certainty. And we're still very, very deep in a moment of uncertainty, and it's not necessarily a bad thing from the employee experience and the operational effectiveness of a company, but it does create a really big chasm in terms of real estate profitability and sustainment. So it's a very interesting thing to toggle between.
So you're having conversations with business owners or CEOs. How do they feel about the current state of where people are working from? Do they feel that people would be more productive coming back to the workplace more often? Are they happy with the productivity and performance that people are putting forth working remotely? How do you see what's the temperature right now that you feel CEOs are experiencing in terms of this situation of coming to the office or working remotely? What's their perspective?
So most of my clients, I would say, are definitely more on the progressive end and understand that this moment requires a lot of experimentation. And so they've been able to protect what they feel is necessary in terms of productivity and, organizational stability, but recognize that there are a lot of moving parts that are in the air right now. And they have enough of a handle on keeping the company profitable or moving in a profitable direction while we experiment with how frequently do people need to meet in person? What types of environments do they need in order to make those in-person moments as effective as possible? How do we get a gauge for productivity and effectiveness for folks that are working virtually? And how can we gauge the productivity in the workplace itself? So my cohort, I happen to be quite lucky of working with folks who understand that the theme of the moment is patience and really deliberate experimentation. But I would say the overall temperature is not quite at that level. I would say my client base is definitely on the more ambitious side of things right now. Most executives, I think, are really struggling to understand what productivity means without line of sight and seeing people in the office and working together. There's still a cognitive break between people working and doing good work, but not being in the office. And I think a lot of that just has to do with, the saying, like, it's better with the devil you know is better than the devil you don't kind of mentality. So I think there's a lot of fear-based decision-making on behalf of executives, just because there isn't a lot of concrete information that can direct them in a more onto a more progressive path. The folks that are willing to experiment fully know that this is it creates instability, but they're creating it in controlled ways. But that takes a very specific type of mentality toward improving a company's operation and employee experience going forward. So I would say both extremes are really prominent. The folks who are really ambitious and want to figure things out, they're working to figure things out. And I would say the majority of the cohort is very cold feet and doesn't want to make any moves unless there's real hard data that tells them that it's safe to do so. And right now we just don't have a lot of that.
Right. Well, I guess to experiment and be patient, you have to have the resources to do that.
Yes, it is a champagne opportunity.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like R&D, right, for your workforce.
Mm-hmm.
But what are, practically, from your perspective, what you see, what are some of the best practices out there that you see employers implementing to best manage the performance and productivity of remote workers?
That's a good question. I think the better way to frame, well, I take that back. I think with remote work specifically, it does require a lot of trust. And so I think the best practices around creating trust is really falling back on the quality of the folks that you hire. If you really trust the people that you're hiring, there shouldn't be that much it shouldn't be that much of a leap to say it doesn't actually matter where you are, so long as you are attentive to your team and deliver on the things that you're required to, and you are actively working to create good work on behalf of yourself, your team, and the organization. I think a lot of companies lose sight of the fact that they go through a relatively rigorous process hiring people to, manifest this vision for each of their companies. Once the people get hired, there's a very sort of parent and child relationship in many companies between the executives and employee base. So I think, as much as you can remember, regardless of seniority, you've hired adults to do a certain body of work. And the more that you can remember that and interact with them on the level that that's the truth, remote work and the trust of productivity, I think, becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, but trust, when you hire somebody, you want to trust them. Maybe some people,
yes,
that are the manager, the boss, may be more skeptical than others, and more trustworthy. But really, trust is something that is earned, right? You need to prove yourself. You need to keep your word. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do it, or, come forth that you can do it for whatever reason. Yep. And that's what builds trust. And when you hire somebody, it takes time for that trust to kick in. So let me go back to existing employees that were coming into the office every day and now are working or went off to remote work, and aren't used to that. Maybe when I know for myself, like, I used to have to go to the library to get out of my office, my home, to avoid distractions, to work on a project so I could concentrate on it. But even then,
Yep.
you have your laptop and you're connected to the internet, so
Yep. Oh,
distractions
let me
are
tell you,
abundant.
my apartment is immaculate because that's what I do. I like mentally, I always have to have everything in place before I can really focus. So to your point, I think distraction is something that we do need to take into account, and it's not necessarily someone slacking or being lazy or not being a good steward, but it's just real life. We're all human beings and we have all these different stimuli that prior to the pandemic, when we were in our workplace, weren't necessarily around us. And so to your point, trust is earned. I think it's a two-way street of providing trust that people live up to, and also then being of your word as an employee to the commitments and things that you say you'll accomplish. For folks who have stayed with the same company, it is on the company to recognize that this isn't just a change in geography. Hybrid work or remote work is not just a change in geography. It's a change in how we ask for and articulate accountability. So that requires building feedback loops of making sure that you're always asking what's working and what isn't. What do you need that you don't have? And, coming up with ways that it's not just the employee telling the organization what they need and what they want, but the organization holding employees to, this is the scope of work that you were hired to do, and you're accomplishing 3 of the 5 of these things, but are lacking on these other 2. What do you need from us in order to make that happen? Is it additional resources? Is there something going on that's outside of work? So it's a lot. The paradigm has completely shifted, and creating systems of accountability are not necessarily, it can be foreign language to a lot of organizations, because we treated the built environment, the workplaces and offices that we showed up to, as our accountability mechanism. But just
Right.
because someone's in the office for 8 hours a day doesn't mean that they are productive or accountable to the work that they're doing, from 9 to 5. So it's eliminating the geographical location of accountability and creating a culture and the norms and behavior. So all these little practices that we individually and collectively do to hold people accountable. And those can have different flavors based on how the age of the company, the demographics of the company, the region, and so on and so forth. What you might do in Montreal is very different than what might be done in New York City, as it would be to Vancouver or Los Angeles. So there's a lot of, that's where it gets custom to each organization, but the intention should be, how do we foster accountability?
Well, there's
That's mission.
there's some basic principles
Yes,
involved in that, like you were just
absolutely.
mentioning, and whether it's having people come into the office or working remotely, if you develop a process or a mechanism to define what people are accountable to or responsible for, and you have a way to
Yep,
track and measure it, what's the difference if they come into the office or they work remotely? When you lack
exactly.
those systems or way of, agreeing on what is the deliverables or what needs to be done by when and how much, it doesn't
Yep.
matter where they are. I guess it's easier to supervise somebody when you can go walk by their desk and see what they're working on. Uh, but
Yeah.
it, but then who wants that in today's world anymore? If you're, like you
Who
said, an adult and mature and responsible, you don't want somebody coming by to check what you're doing. You want to
Right.
sit down and maybe have a conversation of what's working and what's not, and how can we fix it?
Right. And I think the next level to that is, yes, you can walking to someone's desk and having that be a level of accountability. That's accountability person to person. But how do we document accountability to a business unit? How do we document accountability to the organization? Having all of these things written and explicit as opposed to implicit and just kind of the behaviors that we do but don't necessarily talk about. What happens if you get fired and tomorrow you're completely gone? All of your institutional knowledge or the experience that you've had kind of evaporates. And so this, what I'm describing, is not easy. This is complex work, but the outcomes allow businesses to have a central nervous system of information and frameworks and policies that allow them to, it's basically the stopgap. It allows everything to stay native to their system and to their way of working, in a way that right now a lot of people would recognize that the way that their business unit operates, let's say it's the tech organization, works vastly different than how the marketing group works, but neither of them mesh. And so a lot of this is reconciliation of different ways of working into one sort of more umbrella of, these are the ways that you work at this organization. And it's all part of information security and data capture and all these things that sometimes fall through the cracks. It's having something to fall back on, rather than just everyone doing their own thing based on what's natural.
So what about if we talk about collaboration and teamwork? How do you see things are evolving from that perspective? What is the level or the feedback you get from your clients in terms of their impression of how well people are collaborating and working as a team, and the need for that, especially, I guess, for more innovative, creative type organizations that, need to always be bringing new products or new services to the marketplace to stay current and relevant.
Yeah. So that is actually the one piece of work that I think is actually staying the most static, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Part of what I do is run workshops for teams, and I help them go through root cause analyses. And that's basically, they come with one problem, but that's actually the symptom, not the cause. So going through exercises like that, agile retrospectives, things like that, to really help them synthesize these challenges that they're working on. And unless there is a collective agreement and there's enough, going back to trust and autonomy within a group of people, unless there's a lot of built trust, running virtual workshops is still very challenging. Getting people to be energized and participate, it just doesn't convert. I haven't spent a ton of time in Web3 and, in the full AR VR environments, but in my experience, there is nothing that can really replace the human element when it comes to ideation and creation of new concepts. So that, the act itself, I think, deserves to stay static for the time being. I might be proven wrong in about 7 years when, the regular
when you say remain
wearing...
static, you mean like doing it the more traditional method of getting people into a room around the flip chart?
I kind of feel like collaboration is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And right. I don't feel like workshops or collaborative exercises are broken at this moment, or at least they are the least broken thing of the broken things that we're working on right now. So those kinds of activities, I think, are perfect reasons to utilize an office. It might, even if it's not Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, having spaces to come together and think creatively and not be stuck in a boardroom and not have a whiteboard and things like that. Having it be real maker kind of spaces I think makes a huge difference. And it's a level, in order to really be collaborative, there's a level of informality that's required. So, the freedom to operate with the notion that there are no bad ideas. That's hard to convey virtually. And the types of spaces you're in do influence your mentality around it. So a boardroom isn't necessarily going to be the place where you feel like no idea is a bad idea, but a place with couches or bar stools and places like that with whiteboards and markers or post-its and things like that. Those are the kinds of environments that feel like a test bed, and that's those are hard to replicate in the digital realm. So I love just keeping those as is, and those are perfect reasons to still utilize a workplace. Leverage those, have those be the things that happen on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays if that's your hybrid plan. Create reasons for people to have more collaborative sessions as a way to build those weak ties back up from prior to the pandemic. So I think physical space still plays a very big role in collaboration. And it's now what we mostly need to figure out is how frequently is it required? What are the tools and spaces we need in order to make it happen? And how do we really make sure that when we are collaborating and when we are together, we have a really, really tight understanding of what are we there to talk about, what are the desired outcomes, who are the people that are absolutely essential for this conversation, and what are we doing with the time we're spending together. So a lot of what I'm describing is, even with what we were talking about prior, everything needs to be articulated. Everything needs to be recorded and articulated, so that way you get consensus and understanding, so that way you can move forward. A lot of the reason why we all have back-to-back meetings of just, this is the meeting to follow the meeting, or this is a recurring thing and we just show up every week and, we chit-chat and give small updates, is because there isn't a really rigorous scope or agenda. And those require some work in order to make them relevant, but they keep everyone on task and they keep everyone focused on the collective goal rather than kind of meandering and seeing what happens. So a lot of I would say the best practice for post-COVID and just into the future in general is really spending time being articulate about what we're here to do, why we're doing it, who's needed, and documenting it, making sure that it has a home that isn't just on your hard drive.
Yeah, I agree that I'm a big proponent of a collaboration and continuous improvement, and doing exercises in problem solving and team problem solving is a great way to bring people together, exchange ideas, get to know each other, and solve problems that will help the organization, and also provides a platform for people to feel like they're contributing in a bigger way than just doing their daily tasks. They're having an impact on the direction and strategy outcome of the organization. So that's a good reason in itself to continue getting people together. But, a lot of organizations don't put those best practices forward. And, if they did, it would be easier to get people to come in and participate.
Yeah. A lot of it is, I don't think that there is an active us versus them mentality. I think a lot of it is just bad habits that are really, really ingrained in the way that we do things. But I think that there's so much opportunity, calling back to moving away from the sort of parent and child dynamic that can sometimes be found in organizations. The more that you create a relationship of co-creation between executives and employees, one, there just by pure pure statistical odds, you're going to have more ideas and more opportunities to investigate what might work and what could scale the business or create an entirely new business or optimize how things are already getting done, just because you're asking more people and you're asking the people that are actively doing the work rather than making decisions from on high. So there's a ton of net benefit to creating this relationship. I think where the struggle is I think a lot of executives, whether they admit it or not, there is this mentality of the children's book, like if you give a mouse a cookie, I feel like there is a worry of, give an inch, take a mile, when I think if you're really clear about, we want to create a more dynamic relationship around this subject, that's, just be articulate, be prescriptive about what you're asking for, input on, feedback on, whatever it might be. And that makes the relationship less zero sum and more plus, like positive sum.
Right. So what's your prediction if we look forward 5-10 years from now? What's the workplace or the ideal workplace from your perspective going to look like, or would you like it to look like?
So it's so hard for me to think. I think in very micro terms at the same time. So I think on the micro terms, in terms of what any given company's workplace might look like, I think at the end of the day, there are only so many different ways you can configure a workplace of desks, meeting rooms, collaborative spaces, and so on. I think we're going to see a lot more collaborative spaces and lounge spaces and places where people can just be together. So we're seeing a lot more hotel lobbies that are really souped up with, you can sit down and you can co-work there. I happen to be a purveyor of many of those in New York City. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those, and the desks that do, the formal desks that do exist are going to be in environments that are specific to, you're looking for quiet. So no phone calls. It'll function the way that a library might. So I think that we're going to start to see more of that, which is reflective of a workplace philosophy called activity-based working. And the logic of that is effectively similar to how our homes are set up. You cook your food in your kitchen, you eat your food in the dining room, you watch your TV in the living room, and you sleep in your bedroom. So think of, that's kind of the framing of activity-based working. The spaces you use are dependent upon the types of activities or the types of work that you're trying to achieve. On the macro, I think we're going to see, I think the next steps after workplaces decide what they want to look like and how they are going to operate, I think we're going to see city centers really, really change. Like what we understand as central business districts, I don't believe are going to be here in 10 years. And I think that's a good thing. It'll mean that there are self-sustaining, dynamic neighborhoods that people live in, some people work in, and there's a whole set of infrastructure that allows for people to create the community and the work-life integration that they choose. So there's 1.5 million steps and lots of red tape that we need to go through in order to make these things true. But I think that that's the natural progression of where we are headed. And that's the idealistic bent.
So maybe one final question. What about leadership? Because that's, a very important topic to me. I'm sure to you as well.
Yeah.
Along with this, workplace transformation, there has to be also transformation in leadership style and thinking. I mean, we're faced with some huge problems in this world, from economical to environmental, obviously, just the problem of getting everybody fed, distributing food and water to everyone.
Just the garden variety of issues.
Not reaching those in need. So all these things requires And of course, getting people to collaborate in the workplace, not just having those nice design spaces.
Yeah.
Where do you see, or what do you think needs to happen in terms of leadership for transformation to really occur and solve the big problems we're facing today?
Yeah. I mean, one, that's a fantastic question. I think that's the first time I've ever been asked something that meta, but what's so exciting, no, truly, I think, but kind of to root cause, like this is a big linchpin for how all of this gets accomplished. I think on the organizational level, leadership is becoming less and less about the hierarchy and more about who are people in the organization that act as super connectors. Who are the people who kind of behave like the hub on a bike wheel and have spokes and relationships out in all these different ways and have their finger on the pulse of how one side of the business's actions affect the others. So it takes leadership, I think, is becoming less about climbing the ladder and more about becoming someone who has their head on a swivel and is able to piece together disparate bits of information and understand how the ways that different sides of the business interact with one another, and how they might either grease the wheels to make it happen better or interfere because there's something better or there's something more macro playing on in the background that more people need to be aware of. So I think leadership is shifting from you report to me and I give you approvals, which like those are still going to be things, but I think they're going to be leaned on less because leadership does need to become more about being the conductor, not the orchestra conductor, but like the physics conductor of like being the connecting pieces, being the ones that can thread the needle across different narratives in an organization, within an industry, within business in general. To me, that's what I think business leadership is going to eventually evolve into, which personally I think is more interesting and it asks more of the people in those roles, which then to me signals that we will have even better executive talent than we see today. And the parameters for executive leadership are more based on your cross-functional and your relational abilities.
Funny, because while you were speaking, I was thinking conductor, and then you said that's what I was envisioning in my head. So yeah, no, it's true. I mean, if you look at somebody, a conductor of an orchestra, it's all that coming together in that moment. But when you think of what's behind the scenes to get to that performance, there's a lot of greasing the wheel. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of getting to know each person, their strengths, when they need to come in. So it's really, I think that's a very good way to describe it.
Yeah, it's being the facilitator.
Yeah. Excellent.
So again, idealistic. I hope that's how it evolves because I think that's what the future needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hierarchy is helpful in some circumstances, but as long as it's fueled by folks who understand that the role of leadership is to be the facilitator, it works well.
Yeah. And I think, kindness, we need to develop that kindness, not only because we can beat ourselves up when things aren't going, and especially CEOs, executives that are highly driven, they can beat themselves up and then beat, everybody else up at the same time. So I think kindness has to be cultivated and play a big role in what drives and the thinking of leaders as well, and the behavior. So I think there's a good place to stop and to thank you for sharing your insights and your experience. And I hope the transformation that needs to happen in the workplace, but fueled by better leadership, behavior, and thinking, will come to fruition sooner than later, because we're in desperate need of
I
that.
hope so too.
Yeah.
Because we're already a bit late.
So people want to learn more about you. What do they do? What's the path to you?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Corinne Murray, Corinne. And my website for Agate, my consulting company, is Agate, AGATE.studio.
Okay, and I'll put a link to that in the description of the video and the show notes of the podcast. Thank you again, Corinne, for joining me today and sharing. For those new to the channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you get news of new videos. And that's it. Not much more to say. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk again soon.